So who decides that there's only going to be Republican and Democrat? For example, when they do the debates, we only hear from the Republican and Democrat parties. Sometimes when I go in to vote, I'm amazed at the number of people who are running for president, who I've never heard of. Why don't the news people have to share that all equally?
So there is there's a barrier for entry into the debates, and you have to be at 15% in an average of national polls in order to be included.
Okay.
Gary Johnson is at close to 10%, so close, but really not even close enough. If he was at 13 or 14, maybe he'd have more of a case. You could make the argument that bar should be lower. That's set by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is this nonpartisan group, and I think, frankly, the commission is maybe not quite as friendly to third parties as maybe it should be. You know, if I personally were setting the bar, I'd probably put it at 10, so Johnson would be right on the borderline. But I also wouldn't put it at 1%, because then you'd have 12 people on the stage or something. The other thing is that, what's that? Like the Republicans. Yeah, the Republicans had 16, or they had 2 different debates. But there's kind of a complicated sort of political science theory reason as to why we just have 2 parties. And it's basically the way our system is set up, in that all of our elections, be it for county sheriff or for president of the United States, it's what's called first past the post, meaning the person who wins the individual county in the race, or the individual district for city council or whatever, even the president, whichever party or person wins that, they win everything. They get 100% of the seat. Whereas the parliamentary system, in a lot of countries, you know, if the communists get 5% of the votes, they get 5% of the seats. It's not how it works in the United States. And so what that ends up doing is, and this isn't by design, I mean, parties aren't even in the Constitution, but what the founders, when they set up this system, sort of unwittingly, they created the circumstances that usually lead to just a 2-party system. And so that's what we have, even though I think the reason we have a 2-party system is just kind of by accident, based on the way the system is set up. So, you know, and what then ends up happening is that, you know, voters are split into 2 camps, and many of them feel that if they defect, then they're just going to let the other side win, and they don't like the other side. So a lot of people, you know, people ask me that question all the time, and because I think a lot of people are dissatisfied with not just maybe the choices they have for president, but for other races too, and maybe they feel like, you know, they take a little from the Republicans and a little from the Democrats, and, you know, they may feel like they're a middle-of-the-road voter and there's not an option for them, but it's basically just the way the system is set up. But, you know, if you had a parliamentary system, then you could have someone be the prime minister or the president, and they only get, you know, 20% of the vote or something. Do you really want that either? Because then that person has to create a coalition. Like there are challenges with, you know, everything. It's kind of a, you know, grass looks greener on the other side kind of argument, that parliamentary system looks great, but then you implement that, and then there are other problems with it too. So there's this old Winston Churchill quote about something like, democracy is the it's the worst system of government except for all the other ones. I'm butchering the quote, I think, but you know, that's just the way the way it works. So actually, speaking of, you know, Churchill in Great Britain actually does have third parties, even though, and it's a parliamentary system, but it also has that first past the post system. So they have individual districts where you run, and, you know, the person who wins the district gets the seat, or the party that wins the district. But the UK has developed these regional third parties. There's a Scottish National Party now. There used to be the Liberal Democrats existed, and they were strong in certain parts of the country. If we were to have a third party in the United States, I think it would be like a regional party, because then instead of their 10% of the vote being concentrated and wasted all across the country, if you concentrate 10% of the vote, of the national vote, in 2 states or something, then maybe a third party could actually win that state and have some sort of influence. Now, what that party would look like, I don't know, but if you were to have a third party, it would probably have to be concentrated its strength enough to be concentrated in a single state or a few states.
So you do not anticipate a tipping point where people are getting, seem to be in this election, more concerned about the lack of choice between candidates than actually voting their choice? That at some point that will become such a major, because of technology, a major voice from the people, which in the past that wasn't necessarily as great as it is now.
I just think it's structurally, so no matter what, you know, there's just not enough demand in the public for a third-party option, and again, structurally, it's so hard for a third party to get off the ground. We you know, I mean, it's kind of astounding, but you know, Ross Perot was a pretty successful third-party candidate in the 1990s. He got 19% of the vote in 1992. He didn't win a single electoral vote because he couldn't win any of the states. And it just goes to show that even if you have a candidate who has some wide appeal, who is rich, who's going to put a ton of his money into the race, and you know, he still couldn't win any electoral votes because of the way the system is set up. So it's just structurally very, very hard.
And Bernie Sanders, I mean,
yeah, and I mean,
you look at that movement, and you know, it seems to me at some point, not in my lifetime,
yeah.
but at some point somebody may just stand up and say, no more.
Well, but what I think would happen is that basically the Bernie Sanders people would take over the Democratic Party.
Of course, yeah.
And that's actually, you know, so I start this book in 1896, and that's an important election because in that election the Democrats were kind of they were a pretty conservative small government party, and then there's this third party movement called the Populist Party, and one of the people they really like is William Jennings Bryan. And William Jennings Bryan takes over the Democratic Party in 1896 and changes the Democratic Party. But it's not that, you know, what happened is the Democrats, they found themselves in competition with the Populists, so they just took the Populists into their party. And that's what happened like at several points in American history, like the Whig Party, the precursor to the Republicans, they fell apart, got split a number of different ways, and then so there was like a Free Soil Party, and you know, a lot of an anti-slavery party, and the Know Nothing Party, which were basically nativists. And what happened was the Republicans came along in the 1850s and took all those pieces and put them together into one party. And that's what American history generally happens with third parties. So if the Bernie Sanders people rise in strength, it's probably because they just sort of pulled the Democratic Party further to the left.